What did you have to do with the World's Fair?
Well, I was, I was the first actual employee of the Knoxville International Energy Exposition, Inc., which is a nonprofit group formed to try to put on the World's Fair. And I was recruited. I was in business here, and it talked to me about, so I originally committed to 6 weeks just to kind of get the corporation organized and started. What was happening at that point was Chamber of Commerce was involved, the mayor's office, TVA, UT, Oak Ridge National Lab, and finally the U.S. government, Department of Commerce said, hey, give us one point of contact. So I said I did what probably my son in high school could have done at the time, is pull all that together just for communication purposes. Well, that 6 months or 6 weeks turned into 7 years. So I was president and CEO of the World's Fair. At the time we called it Energy Expo 82, and then for marketing purposes later expanded it to the 1982 World's Fair.
So what did you do here in town that would make someone go, hey, Bo would be somebody to talk to about doing this?
Well, I used to kiddingly say I'd just been let out of an insane asylum, but it's not the case. I was, I don't think. I had been a vice president at UT. I had been in the governor's chief of staff. I'd done some newspaper business work and other things, and had developed, done some real estate development with Cherokee Bluff across the river, and so just a kind of a variety of things, and been involved in the community. The mayor had appointed me on the planning commission, and I was getting ready to be, until I took this job, the volunteer chairman of the United Way. So I'd been involved in that for a while. So anyway, it's just a guy about town, I guess.
You from here originally, or did you come here through UT, or for that job as vice president, or how did you end up in Knoxville to begin with?
Okay, well, I grew up near here in a little town called Harriman, Tennessee, most from about the 5th grade through high school. UT was my center of the universe, my family's center of the universe, as was most people. And I went in the Air Force right out of high school to get qualified for the GI Bill so I could go to the university, and I came back then and started at UT and finished there in journalism. That was my major, and actually before I graduated, I was hired and went up and was editor of the newspapers in Sevier County, the News Record and the Gatlinburg Press, and I had a ball doing that for about 4 years, and then went down to Atlanta with Southern Bell, the telephone company, corporately and marketing, and kind of found out that major corporations and it wasn't my skill set, just kind of interest level, were different, and it was a great company, but we didn't. So I got an offer to job as head of the news bureau at UT in public relations, and came back to Knoxville then. And then within a year later, I was offered this opportunity to take a leave of absence and go and get involved with governor.
Now you said that became a 7-year position. I mean, was that started 7 years before the fair, or did it extend a few years beyond?
No, pretty much before. This was, I was
75.
76.
76.
Yeah, late 76. So I think it was either late 76 or early 77, but I think it was late 76. Yeah, it was, because it was, I think, December of 76. And then a lot of people don't remember that the first application was for a World's Fair here in 1980. And the Department of Commerce had a problem with that, and frankly, I think we would have too. One, we could have never gotten the roads fixed in that length of time, and so we changed our application to 82, and then we started that process in late 76, early 77.
So when you joined, was it already a World's Fair at that point? I mean, I know you said it was branding purposes that changed from Expo.
Well, it's like calling a football field a gridiron. So it's what you call it. But if the official in any World's Fair or Expo is a International Exposition. It's governed internationally by the International Exhibition Commission, and then it's handled in the U.S. government by the Department of Commerce, U.S. Travel Service. So it's officially International Expositions. You can call it a International Exposition, an Expo, a World's Fair, and none of them would be incorrect. Now there are categories, just not to get too deep in the weeds on this, but and the two categories are a general exposition, and that would be not many current viewers would remember, but like Montreal in 1967, which was a general category. The one in Spokane in 1974, which preceded us, was a special category exposition on theme of environment. And so ours is a special category, was exposition with the theme of energy, and that being our concentration. So it's a little more focused, and in this case, again, not to get too deep in the woods, but it is much deeper in the woods. The organizers build the pavilions, and the countries come and rent the space and build their exhibit within that, and outside. And in the other case, they build their own pavilions.
You know, I'm shooting this in the context of it being 40 years, so we're getting a real head start.
Right.
Somebody say, hey, you know, Bo's going to be here. Next year's the 40th. We ought to get him while we can.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about just the fact that it has been that long?
Well, I'm glad I'm still here to talk about it, and having many wonderful and memories, and many challenging memories of challenges that we had getting there. I used the line at the opening day of the World's Fair that stole it from a legislative friend of mine, that World's Fairs it's like good sausage. Everybody enjoys the product, but nobody should have to see them being made. So in many cases, that's what it was. It was a trying and multifaceted and but yet wonderfully exciting and great undertaking.
You know, being that far removed from it, though, I wonder what are some of the main things that just immediately jump out to you about the experience that maybe you wouldn't think, man, that wouldn't be the first thing I thought would come to mind 39, 40 years later. But what really stands out to you about it?
Well, I think it would be looking at the joy and wonderment on kids' faces and adults' faces when they came, and watching them get exposed to things. People in this area get exposed to cultures and food and music and things that in a 6-month span, in many cases, they might have a 12-hour span of being on site, that many of the visitors would not have had an opportunity to experience. And I remember kind of a side example of that. In the amphitheater, the state amphitheater, which still exists on site, the Knoxville Symphony played there at just about every night. And sometimes the conductor, a good guy, a good friend, would complain about the ancillary noise because the fair was still going on. People were moving around. There were other noises happening. And I said, you know, I know that's, you know, you have to put up with that, but probably there are people walking by, not sitting in the seats, but walking by, hearing your music, and that may be the only classical music they will ever hear, live classical music they will ever hear. So, you know, it's a different setting, it's a different experience, but you know, it's just wonderful to see and feel and hear and watch and have them react, have people react to it.
Is there anything that stands out in terms of, man, this was a real turning point to be like, yes, this is going to happen?
Well, a couple of things. One, you know, energy be our theme, and this was coming out of an energy crisis that the world had been in shortage of oil and gas prices were up, and a lot of people most people won't remember that, the speed limits on the interstate was reduced to 55 miles an hour for a couple of years, and to reduce the consumption of gas. And dependence on oil was important. So a lot of discussions early about wind and solar and other aspects of. But one of the things that stood out to me, or just in my memory when it pops out, it was energy related, but it's kind of industry related, is the Japanese pavilion, when they had their exhibit was a robot, a painting robot, and it was a huge, big painting arm. They would dip down in the paint, go up and paint these pictures over and over and over. And I don't think, I certainly didn't have a knowledge of, and many people didn't, about what impact robots were going to have on our society and on our workforces as time went on. That's just one aspect of it.
I think about how many people who may go by today, and that's been their entire life. They never saw it when it was an old rail yard.
Right.
It's kind of like going to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower. Like, you can't imagine it without it.
Right.
There are a lot of folks now that I don't think that they could imagine Knoxville skyline without it.
Well, and also, for those who would remember, that where the World's Fair Park is, and the site of the World's Fair, prior to that time was a flea-ridden, downtrodden, abandoned railway that was a huge, unattractive armpit between UT campus and Fort Sanders and downtown Knoxville. So that was, why would you place it in some place like that? Well, because we wanted to get rid of it and turn that into something that's beneficial and more pleasant and usable in a better way for the community, and which I think it did. And also UT was able to get some pieces of property around the railroad that they otherwise couldn't. So it's for those of us who've been around long enough to remember what it looked like before, it's one where you can always pass by and enjoy it. But it's like many things, I can remember, unfortunately, or not, I guess fortunately, I can remember when there were just beginning to have these things called interstate highways. So, I don't remember wagon and buggy, horses and buggy wagons, but anyway, so it's, yeah.
I'm here from Harriman on behind a team of...
No, I didn't.
No, I'm actually surprised whenever I was at WBIR to look and be like, oh, that interstate really only opened in the late 60s. That's not that long ago. I tend to think about it being Dwight Eisenhower era, not...
Right. It was called a national defense system, and one of that was, like I mentioned, the 1980 original target for the fair, and then we changed it to 1982. And one of the reasons was we had an interstate condition here. It was infamous throughout at least the eastern United States, called malfunction junction. I don't know if you heard that term or not, but it wouldn't take digging too deep in history to find it. And we had two interstates, I-75 and I-40, still do, but intersected into one lane in the middle of Knoxville. Well, sometimes in the summer, the months, tourism time, the traffic would be, from the north, would be backed up past Oneida, just almost like a parking lot. Many times the same way from the east and west. So that was one of the sub-major motivations to doing this, and it took a major commitment. I mean, the millions and millions of dollars that were spent needed to be. I mean, it was really almost a criminal design that we had been living with here, but to get that, I've had so many people say, well, to get malfunction junction fixed was well worth it just for, if we did nothing else,
So what was it like to work with local government leaders and the butcher banks and other folks to bring all this together?
Yeah, I was thinking the other day, I'm putting together or trying to put together a memoir of some things I've done in life, including obviously this escapade in Knoxville, and I put a list of, on the World's Fair section, I put a list of people without whom the World's Fair would not have happened. It would not have happened. And I put on that list, the first one is Stuart Evans, who was head of the Downtown Knoxville Association, attended the World's Fair in Spokane, had the idea, came back and brought it. I mean, if he hadn't had that exposure and the idea, and because what happened in Spokane, which was on a river, turned it back to the river, back to the city. Small town, not a huge metropolitan area. And then the next person I put on that list is Kyle Testerman, who was mayor at the time. And Kyle, a hard-driving businessman, no-nonsense guy, but really pretty progressive guy. Somehow he latched onto it. He liked the idea. And then he did one of the brightest things of recruiting two people to head this up in the beginning. And one was Jake Butcher, and the other was Jim Haslam. And he got one of the national leading fundraisers for the Democratic Party in Jake Butcher, and who was also president of the largest and owner of the largest bank in East Tennessee, in the whole Appalachian region in this state. Jim Haslam, who's a renowned businessman and accomplished obviously in business, but also was noted as one of the largest Republican fundraisers in Tennessee and in the country, very noted for this, and both of whom were also known to be very dedicated to trying to do things for the community. So we had to get both sides of the aisle covered. That's to start with. Plus, both obviously were business oriented. So they were the chair and vice chair of this, what ultimately became this corporation. And to me, those were the second and third people, or third and fourth people to be recruited, that without whom this would not have happened. And so you asked me about the quote butcher banks, but I'm talking about, we were talking about the,
Just in general.
it was the if we didn't have the head of the largest bank in East Tennessee for this project, it would be difficult, and it would have been maybe impossible. If we didn't have and Jim was very active and high up in the second largest bank, Park National Bank, plus if we hadn't had a leader in the Democratic Party who could call on the Democrats in office, and a leader in the Republican Party who could call on the Republicans in office, because over the time, this project of development, just to give you an example, just think politics, we started, the president was Ford. Gerald Ford was president when this effort started. And then it was Jimmy Carter. And then it was Ronald Reagan. So Republican, Democrat, Republican. Philosophies different people. Jake was a major fundraiser for Jimmy Carter involved, and that was important. Jim Haslam was majorly involved for President Reagan and others. We had a great senior senator in Howard Baker, Republican, later as chief of staff for President Reagan. We had a new young Democrat named Jim Sasser, who had been elected, a bright guy, later became ambassador to Japan. And we had, it started with a Democrat in the governor's office, and then, and you talk about political conflict. In 1978, the chairman of the board, Jake Butcher, stepped down as chairman because he ran for governor. Right. He ran against Lamar Alexander, and it was a tough race. And Jake got the nomination, Lamar got the nomination, and and then Jim Haslam became chairman during those campaign years. and or months, seemed like years. And but so I also put on my list people who we could not have had the favor of that. One of them is Lamar Alexander, because if we hadn't had a governor who would have been for what Knoxville was trying to do, and who would not have had taken the infrastructure steps what the state needed to do with the federal government on this highway. But to do what had to be done in a 3-4 year period on the highways was monumental. And if it hadn't had that commitment. So that's why it's a long answer to your maybe short question, but I'm saying all these pieces really work together, and I think that resultant World's Fair is a result of bipartisan cooperation of the beyond the nth degree. People put aside differences and got together to make this happen, and which is and I'm not going to get into politics, but it's such quite a contrast to where we are today.
Right. So the main importance, though, for having the support of elected officials is because you need state and federal money to fix the road. Is that the main contribution? That this is why we need to.
No, if a major event like this, international event, and the federal government's looking at it, forget who's president, the staff people looking at it, if obviously the mayor, if the mayor's not, of the town is not for it, then who's going to support it? And then secondly, the governor, because if the governor of a state, and this is the first international exposition ever in the South, Southern United States. There'd never been one, and so St. Louis would be the nearest, and that was in the 1902, I think it was, or 05. Anyway, so yeah, it was more than just what they could do for us, but it was their commitment to supporting it in all elements. I mean, we needed the Department of Tourism, we needed the Department of Economic Development, and all these pieces working together to make these things happen. That's needed several departments within the federal scheme too. So again, it's not we need the governor because he's going to fix the roads. Well, that was a huge challenge and very necessary. But we need the governor, period.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I don't want to categorize this incorrectly, but it almost feels like, in retrospect, I look at that scruffy little city Wall Street Journal thing and think, that was kind of insulting, but damn, that was a blessing. I don't know if that's true.
Oh,
but
it is.
I mean, what was the difference in support and enthusiasm before and after an article that's in a newspaper?
It wasn't daylight to dark, because we had really a great number of huge supporters and most of the political supporters. But like any project, we had specific and directed opposition, but also people that weren't sure. They didn't. But you brought it up, and that was a turning point, because when in their minds, our minds, when somebody from New York comes down and does interview, and I was her primary project or subject of interviewing, and I could tell it was a she. She had an attitude. She was finding, there's no answer was positive. It was always turned to negatives. I knew it wasn't going to be a pleasant story. But when she called it somebody from New York, as people look at it, Wall Street Journal, called it a scruffy little city, it's just like, well, we can fight among our family, but you outsiders don't attack our family. And we're going to come together and we're going to show you what a scruffy little city can do. And it was a magic push button moment from that you can't say, well, how can you quantify it? I don't know how you quantify it, but it was there. It's very real, and it happened.
It sounded like you already maybe had the support of leaders. Was it more a support of the average Joe that really got like lit a fire under folks for that, or was it was it actually something that built momentum with officials and people who were in positions of power?
Well, I think it took took the leadership first to be committed, and then, but I think that as we had a group called the volunteers called the Expo Energizers, and they were volunteers. They would show up at meetings. They would show up when we were hosting. Later if we had a governmental, like a foreign ambassador visiting the city and we're recruiting for the fair, they would show up at the airport and things of this nature and do all kinds of things. So there was a lot of what I'll call sidewalk involvement. It wasn't just leadership. That there were at least a couple of thousand of those, I remember. I couldn't tell you. And then we had Expo ambassadors, and these are people who put up money that and signed notes. And if the fair hadn't happened and we hadn't had the income we expected, then there's well over $1 million people had signed, pledged $1,000 to put in, and they had no guarantee at all that they get anything back from it. They didn't make anything, but they didn't have to pay. But they so you had levels, people, and there were probably at least 400 of those that had signed notes.
Well, it's one thing to get the support of local folks and get those, but I mean, this is an effort that you also need to communicate and coordinate with nations around the world.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I guess what is, are you able to describe the communication with all of the visiting countries and trying to set up the different pavilions and parameters? I don't know, what was that?
Well, it's a sales job. The same information about what our attendance would be and what we have to offer, what the theme is and what the resources here. Same message that we sold our own government, we're using basically to sell other governments. Now, they can't be sold until all the approvals come through. Our government approves it, and then in April of '77, the international body approved it, and BIE, Bureau of International Expositions, in Paris, and we had a bunch of us were in Paris, and we had a phone call back to Knoxville and big celebration here. And then the President of the United States has to issue a proclamation inviting the people of the world, the governments of the world, to come to Knoxville and participate. So so the embassies, the ambassadors are informed, so the communication occurs. Now, the President has a few things to do, and ambassadors have a few things to do, and we, the local community, are the ones that take the risk. They have to put up the money, most of the money. The federal government puts the money in, but they don't take the basic risk, and that's the difference in the U.S. and some other worlds, other parts of the world that do it. So we have to sell, and so we started. I made trips all over the world, and others have, but to go and visit and invite, make sure they're invited, tell the story, and get them there. Some that we felt were going to tell.
Is there anyone who showed up, or that you were like, man, I didn't think that they were going to come?
Well, I guess the biggest surprise was Hungary, because they were a part of the Eastern Bloc. We had several that were coming. Our largest exhibitor, it's like if a developer's doing a shopping center, and you got your anchor tenant, Macy's or Saks Fifth Avenue, whatever. You got your draw. That's your big draw to get everybody else there. Well, our major tenant was going to be the Soviet Union. They were actually building their exhibit. It was going to be huge. I don't know what all was in it, but I mean, I know I was over there 4 different times, and so they were going to be our largest exhibitor and probably the biggest draw. Well, a little thing like politics reared its head. In 1980, or late 79 and 80, the Soviet Union invaded a little country we'd never heard of called Afghanistan. Oops, we're talking to them now, aren't we? talking about them now. And so in 1980, Moscow was hosting this thing we're in now called the Olympics. And so President Carter said, we're not coming, withdrew the participation. And several other countries followed suit and did as well. Well, all of a sudden our anchor tenant's not coming, because there's no way they're coming. So and Soviet Union, as it was then, so long story, but a very important part of the story was that I still had visited Hungary and felt they really wanted to come, but I didn't think any of them would come. But they accepted and they came, and had not a large exhibit, but I thought one of the neatest one. They had Rubik's Cube, and they had, I'm trying to remember his first name. I think it was John, but the young Rubik who invented Rubik's Cube came to the fair and had contests with kids who'd come in. One kid from Oak Ridge beat him once.
So that was a Hungarian exhibit?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So
their scientific energy. So anyway, that's a long answer, but it's not.
Because they're on that side of the Iron Curtain.
Exactly. We didn't. So they were the only come, and so then that turned our focus when that event happened in 1980, and again we're in 1982, so we're pretty close, and that's when we turned our focus to China, who had never participated in the World's Fair anywhere. And that's where we called in every chit available by every congressman, every senator, every president. Got former President Carter involved. We got President Reagan involved. We had people from former President Nixon's administration, because Nixon is the one who recognized China, and he was kind of like a god over there in many ways because he recognized. Anyway. So that was our focus on, and that ended up being the major anchor tenant, if you will, of the fair.
How many of these countries did you personally visit in that build-up? I mean, where did you travel for this? Because you weren't just calling or
No. I visited most of them. I think the only one a couple I didn't was Peru. Jake Butcher had a connection there, and they brought that in. I was set to go, even though we knew they were going to come, but I was set to go to Australia when all this other stuff happened. I had a trip planned, and so I got our chief consultant, King Cole, who had been president of the Spokane World's Fair, great guy and such a great asset to this whole effort, having his experience and contacts. So I got King to go to Australia, so I didn't go there, and he went on then from there to South Korea. So Australia, South Korea, and Peru I did not visit. But
just rattle off some of the places that you did go.
Well, Soviet Union, I went to Russia 4 times. I went to, of course I was in France a lot because of those meetings we attended. Obviously England, Italy, Austria, the countries of the European Union, and they had a joint exhibit with all those countries, but I visited all of them. Egypt, let's see, I went to Scandinavia. We didn't end up getting a Scandinavian countries, but I was up recruiting up there, and so went to saw Japan several times, and then of course China several times, and so it's and people used to, again, I grew up in Harriman, Tennessee. People say, "Do you ever get tired of traveling?" And I said, occasionally I got a little tired during travel, but the day I get tired of traveling, I grew up in Harriman, Tennessee. I wasn't even sure I'd ever get to Nashville, let alone out of this country. So the day I don't appreciate it, and I did appreciate it.
Well, I mean, I think the thing to me is that's not an easy time to travel a lot of those places either.
Right.
To say, I mean, now it's no big deal to, I can get a ticket to Hong Kong and Beijing, but I mean, that wasn't.
Well, we had air connections then, so
You know what I mean? Well, I mean, I'm just saying that there was a little bit more involved to go to the Soviet
It took a little
Union.
longer, yeah.
And do you think there is still a place for World's Fairs.
Well, there hasn't been one in the U.S. Oh, there's one after ours in New Orleans, and it was New Orleans. I love New Orleans, but theirs was not extremely successful because of primarily it's one of the reasons we were successful and met our goals on attendance over 11 million. They didn't come when they thought they would come. It was different than what we thought because of the recession that was in the middle U.S. and the Midwest and the auto industry, which is a big part of the tourism that comes in our area in the summer. Summer was down. May and October were way up, but we had people who could come and get here. I used to, in going around to selling when we were putting our financial package together, and we had to sell banks on being part of the 40 banks that were part of the financing package. And I quit telling, and I started asking. I said, "What do you think is the most visited national park?" And they would more often than not say Yellowstone. I say, "Well, you're almost right. They're second, but the most visited national park has 3 times the number of visits, and that's the Great Smoky Mountains National Park." I said, "Does that mean that's a better park than Yellowstone?" "No, it means it's where the people are." And we were located, within a 500-mile radius of Knoxville is 65-70% of the U.S. population, and so it was easy to get here. So that's, and I think I've gotten away from your question, but I'm back into the feasibility of it in terms of that.
What kind of role do you think that there is a role for the future of now we're going to have more World's Fairs anywhere. What kind of role do you think it?
Well, there have been other expositions in other countries, and I've been to a few, but not all of them by any means. I think there's a, properly motivated, properly paced. I think there's still a desire from a lot of people and a lot of things for people to see something in person. It's amazing what access we have to information and digitally. And I can't, just thinking back on the World's Fair, I didn't have to turn off my cell phone before an interview then because we didn't have cell phones. Well, I had anyway. But it's so I one of the questions I had that I quite often sometimes referred to, just prior to the World's Fair, I was being interviewed along as an NBC reporter, national reporter, and she asked me the question, do you think World's Fairs are necessary? And I said, absolutely not. I said, there's nobody has to have a World's Fair to exist. Nobody has to have a symphony. Nobody has to have a ballet. Nobody has to have a football game. The unnecessary things of life is what makes life, to me, rich and fulfilling, and I think to most people. So, are there now the undertaking, the way we do it in the United States? I don't know many communities that will, have to undertake the financial risks to have a World's Fair. But I think events, real people, just when we had the British Pavilion during the World's Fair, when Prince Albert, or the one in line to succeed right now, was born. And Diane had the baby, and they had these big, it's a boy, they had a big celebration and brought out, had diapers and everything, and had a big party and all that. So, but that was real to them particularly, but it was more real to us because we were there with them as we could enjoy it.
What do you think is the legacy of the fair 40 years after?
Well, I don't know that I'm. To me, it was to anyone who attended. I think not anyone, but most who attended, I think, would say it was a delightful time in Knoxville, and we had people they got season passes, and they come up and say, I've been there 100 times, or several that went every day for 180 days. I didn't even do that. You know, I was out of town some of that 180 days. So I think, you know, the memories are strong, and the memories are good. I think turning a piece of downtrodden real estate into an asset for downtown Knoxville is probably one of the main legacies I think that exists. The indirect consequences of the interstate and all those things probably would eventually happen sometime, but I don't know. But that would not have happened without having that event. And I think people still enjoy some aspects of the site, the Sun Sphere, the amphitheater, and other things.
I'm from North Carolina, and my wife and I, anytime we drove through Knoxville, this is before I moved here, every time we would drive by, we would see the Sun Sphere. She would go, my grandma and grandpa brought me there when I was 5 years old. And we went to the World's Fair. And I don't know, that there are a lot of folks with that, whether they're here in Knoxville or around. I don't know, what's that feeling to you to know that?
Well, I think that's, you know, we're to be a part, as so many were, a part of something that impacted people for a long time is a good thing, I think, if it impacted them positively. But I think that I know first few years after the fair, quite a few years actually, I don't know, half a dozen or more, and I would be out in different parts of Tennessee and just be sitting in a restaurant, and some young person would come up to me and say, thank you, you gave me my first job when I was at UT. I was working at the World's Fair. Or when I was in Knoxville, I went from one employee to, we didn't employ them, but indirectly, or there were actually, at peak times, there were 10,000 people working on that site. And a lot of them were, you know, weren't even close to 30 years of age, you know. So there's a lot of young people that had their first jobs and at that time. And then kids like your wife at 5 who was brought here, and so it's a good feeling.
You know, when you're going through that back then, I don't know that you're thinking, in 40 years they're going to interview me about this. This is going to be something that is always what I'm remembered for. How much of was there a feeling when you were doing that this is something that I'm going to be remembered for?
Well, I don't think I thought of it like that. I don't think most people do at the time. You're just trying to get to the next day, you know, and make sure that you know. And when the 180 days were over, and I stayed involved a little bit while they did some of the closeout. But you go on to other things, other parts. You know, your life goes on, but I felt good about all the effort by all the people and all the commitments that were made and what the outcome was. Was it perfect? No, I've never been involved in anything in my life that was perfect. I've been involved with some people who thought they were perfect, but I hadn't found one yet. But anyway, no, I don't. I'm glad for health reasons that I'm you know, still identified with it, with those who do know a little bit of history to trace it back, because I'm proud of it.
Does anybody at this point ever, I mean, you said that you had strangers to you coming up, associating you with that event. What point does that kind of fade, or has it faded? Do people still say, hey, you know, Bo did the World's Fair?
Well, no, that doesn't happen very often. But sometimes when I'm in Knoxville, come back, I've got 2 sons who live here and their families, and grandchildren, and if I'm out with them, and may run into somebody that's been around that might recognize me, but you know, it's like anything else, you know, time, people get involved in other things.
Is there anything I have not asked you anything that, if we are talking about the fair, either that I have asked you and you would reemphasize, or anything that I have not asked you, that you would say, man, be sure to get this across. People need to know this about.
Well, one of the things I tried to emphasize early on is the vast cooperation from so many different quarters. People that would be fighting in Congress would be working together on this. And we had John Duncan, a Republican, and Joe Evans, a Democrat, working in Congress together to get the appropriations needed for this. And Howard Baker and Jim Sasser, and all those type of things. And then businesses that normally are competing, but they're working together to bring something that's beneficial to Knoxville. And from a business standpoint, whether they were going to make anything out of it or not. So it's, I think that's, and also then you asked me, go back to your very first question about the butcher banks. And I think that there, unfortunately, was a really skeptical or maybe worrisome doubt in people's minds that after, soon after the fair, the investigations continued or began, I'm not sure what. And I was sorry that it occurred, and Jake was a good friend of mine, a good guy, and I wasn't involved in the banking part, and we continued to be friends until his death, and he had, and it is, I think, just so unfortunate what happened. But it's like, okay, what you don't want to happen in the community is saying, well, look what happens when you stick your neck out. Well, you get it chopped off, you get your head chopped off. Well, the fact that they committed and stuck their neck out along with all these others, why I mentioned, and it happened, that bank, it didn't happen because of the World's Fair. It was just he was in many ways, so publicly identified with it as volunteer chairman of the board, that, so I would say don't let, the downside overcome the good side. And that would be maybe the message I was trying, by not trying to avoid talking about it, but to looking at in totality what it took to make something like this happen.
Why does someone who's watching this care that 40 years ago there was a World's Fair?
Well, I think, depending on how you look at it, they should, one, be nice to be aware of it if they weren't. Two, that this was the first World's Fair in the southern United States, and depending on how you look at New Orleans, maybe the only one, only successful World's Fair. That we had over 11 million people, 11 million visits on that site in 6 months. That's almost, 60. That's an average of 63,000 a day. And if you're in business, that's, things are happening when you got people, they're buying things and spending things. But they're becoming aware of Knoxville, they're becoming aware of the world, they're educated more, just like travel educates and everything. So I think if you care about anything for your community, if you care about anything for enlightening people, if you care anything about people enjoying themselves, fireworks every night, that in itself brought joy every night. So then why not care?